Supposed biblical error, Joseph of Arimathea. Some skeptics argue Joseph of Arimathea probably did not exist, and instead was a literary invention to get Jesus in a tomb. First, John Loftus argues one reason for thinking the town of Arimathea didn't exist is because it's not been found. We have no idea where the location of the town of Arimathea is, whereas we do know the location of other biblical sites like Bethlehem, Jerusalem, Capernaum, and Damascus. We don't have any other textual reference to the town in any ancient text, apart from those influenced by the biblical narrative, and there is no archaeology confirming the location of this town. This is nothing more than an argument from silence. First, Arimathea might just be a variant term or pronunciation of the town Ramatha. Even if that is not true, the loss of an ancient town in the modern age is nothing new. We still cannot find the capital city of Sargon of Akkad, even though we have found several other cities in that region. Akkad would have been much bigger than a town called Arimathea. We also have lost the city of Azak, which was a contemporary of Arimathea. Kings of the Parthian Empire were crowned there, and yet it cannot be located today. Josephus mentions a Jewish town called Taricia, which he says he built a wall at to prepare for the Roman invasion. Yet today, we're still not entirely sure where this town was. In fact, we have hundreds of towns and cities mentioned in ancient sources that cannot be located today. It's not like Arimathea is the exception, like skeptics imply. Most have just been lost to time, as we would expect. So just because we cannot find Arimathea, like we cannot find Azak or Akkad, that doesn't mean it probably didn't exist. This is being uncharitable with the available data that would not apply to other ancient sources. Loftus also highlights an idea that Arimathea might be a literary device that means best disciple town. But this is a fringe theory that's only promoted by Jesus mysticists. The idea Arimathea means best disciple town is speculation at best and an etymological fallacy at worst. It is very easy to look at city names and derive meaning that has no historical basis. For example, I once read a book where the author claimed Britain and America were in biblical prophecy, and that just before the Assyrians annexed the northern kingdom of Israel, the tribe of Dan sailed away and resettled in the British Isles. One of his pieces of evidence was that some landmarks and locations could have been derived from the name Dan. This is erroneous reasoning based on mere speculation. You can make just about anything say what you want with wordplay. I grew up around Pittsburgh, but the name doesn't mean a city filled with pits. Just like the idea Arimathea means best disciple town is speculation at best, without an ounce of historical data to support it. Even if that is the meaning of the name of the town in the Gospel of Mark, that doesn't mean the town was a literary invention. Jewish authors would at times take historical things and use wordplay to make up puns. Nebuchadnezzar's name was a slight modification of his actual name to mean Nebu protects the mule. If the town was slightly modified to mean best disciple town, that would actually be consistent with Jewish literary practices of making puns, and not actually support the notion the town was entirely made up. However, Dale Allison notes, fictional names do not seem to be a standard fare, either in Mark or his tradition. In other words, there are no indications of Mark inventing town names elsewhere in his gospel to give a random character a meaning through a pun. Joseph would be the exception. Also, if you're inventing a myth, then why not just invent a personal name that means best disciple, instead of claiming the town from where he was from meant he was the best disciple? The whole concoction doesn't make sense, and it's far more likely Arimathea is not a literary invention that means best disciple town. Furthermore, Allison notes there's no reason for the early church to make up the burial account, as it doesn't serve their purposes, and the whole account could have worked without it. For one, Christians didn't hide the fact that Jesus was shamefully crucified. Instead, they openly embraced it. Yet skeptics want us to believe they couldn't handle the fact that Jesus was shamefully thrown into a mass grave or trench, so they had to invent an entombment story? Are we to believe that Christians who acknowledge the humiliation of crucifixion were somehow unable to allow that Jesus was denied a decent burial, as though the latter were so more dreadful than the former? If the gospel authors were just making up legends, they could have just had Jesus thrown into a mass grave, and at his resurrection also brought all the bodies in the grave back to life with him, similar to what Matthew says happened at his death. There is no reason for the Christians to hide a shameful burial if that is what actually happened. And if they were just making things up, a shameful burial would fit more with their theme. It also would have better fit with Old Testament prophecies, as J. Spencer Kennard remarked. If Christianity had fashioned the entombment on the basis of prophecy, it would have left the body, because of Isaiah 53:9, with the corpses of other criminals. Allison also notes to instead depict a member of the Sanhedrin, the very group that had just murdered the Lord, as the one providing a tomb, goes against the tendency of the Passion traditions. The Gospel authors have to go out of their way to point out Joseph was exceptional and different from the rest to explain why this happened. There are also no divergent traditions on what happened to the body of Jesus. All our early sources agree Jesus was placed in a tomb, and given that, there is no reason to doubt them. So as Allison says, one might suppose that Joseph of Arimathea is historical memory, like other names in Mark, such as John the Baptist, Peter, Andrew, James, John, Judas, James the brother of Jesus, Mary the mother of Jesus, Herod Antipas, Pilate. Loftus also mentions additional arguments to suggest that Joseph of Arimathea is mythical, and we'll tackle some of his better ones. He says Mark is ambiguous on whether or not Joseph was a disciple of Jesus, because Mark only says he was looking for the kingdom of God. But this is to ignore the literary evidence in Mark. In chapter 1, the message of Jesus is described as the kingdom of God. So Mark subtly implies Joseph was a follower of Jesus. Some also argue the Gospels say the Sanhedrin unanimously condemned Jesus. So it is unlikely if Joseph was a member, he would have both condemned Jesus and be a secret follower. But this is to ignore the use of hyperbolic language throughout the Gospels. Matthew 4:24 says the fame of Jesus spread through all of Syria, and all the sick were brought to him. This is probably just hyperbole. Mark 4:34 says Jesus explained everything to his disciples. This probably doesn't mean Jesus literally taught them everything in existence. Likewise, in Luke 22, it records all the members said, "Are you the Son of God?" This probably doesn't mean literally that every member had to ask Jesus. It is just standard hyperbolic language that all humans occasionally use. It is like today if we said Congress passed a law. That doesn't mean every member of Congress agreed to pass the bill. Loftus also brings up Acts 13, which has Jesus being buried by the Sanhedrin, not specific members that dissented. So it seems to be a different story than what the Gospels say. Ironically, this passage seems counterproductive for the skeptic to bring up, as it also says Jesus was buried in a tomb, which many skeptics want to deny. Plus, we also have to remember, as Allison notes, Luke, in recording this sermon by Paul, didn't see it as creating any tension for the burial narrative that he just reported at the end of his own gospel. Most of all, we have to remember Paul in this passage is giving a basic summary, not a detailed account, so he's being very general. In verse 27, he just refers to the residents of Jerusalem carrying this out, not anyone specific. It'd be like today if I said the US fought the Germans in World War II. It would obviously just be a general claim, and it doesn't mean we literally hunted down every German on the face of the earth. Furthermore, Allison notes the plurals in Acts support the gospel account. Observe also that the plurals of Acts 13:29, they took him down and they laid him in a tomb, match the plurals of Mark 16:6, the place where they laid him. Mark 2 seems to imply that Joseph did not act alone. So it appears Luke, Acts, Mark, and John fit together to form a nice undesigned coincidence on the burial of Jesus. Finally, Loftus tries one objection I could not help but respond to. He finds it odd that if Jesus was buried in a tomb, we lack records of Christians venerating the tomb until the 4th century. However, they did venerate other sites. So he suggests the tomb was a later legend with no historical basis. This argument is easily addressed by looking at history, because given all that happened, the location of the tomb would likely have been lost. Let's remember Josephus tells us in 70 AD that when Rome seized the city, Jerusalem was so thoroughly razed to the ground by those that demolished it to its foundation that nothing was left that could ever persuade visitors that it had once been a place of habitation. The Jewish Christians also relocated to the city of Pella. Jerusalem was then left in ruins for 60 years, after which the Emperor Hadrian came in and rebuilt on top of the ruins and tried to wipe out any memory of its Jewish heritage. Jews were not even allowed in the city, and Christians suffered through several persecutions before they were finally allowed to establish holy sites in Jerusalem in the 4th century. Given that the city was destroyed and the Jewish-born Christians, the descendants of the primary witnesses, could not even go back into the city, it's not surprising the location of the tomb was lost, let alone unable to be venerated. Plus, after that, Christians did find a possible location of the tomb of Jesus and begin venerating it. So Loftus and other skeptics are not being fair given the history of Jerusalem. Thus, given all this data, we have sufficient reason to apply the principle of charity to the Gospels and accept the historicity of Joseph of Arimathea. All the data strongly suggest he is a historical memory, not a literary creation.